And China's President Xi Jinping has met the leaders of South Korea and Japan separately ahead of their Trilateral summit. High on their agenda, the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Their talks come amid concerns that North Korea is preparing to launch an intercontinental ballistic missile. And for more on this, Grant Newsham, Senior Research Fellow at the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies, joins us live from Tokyo. Grant, ties between these three countries are quite complex, it has to be said. What can we expect then to come out of this trilateral summit?
I would say at the most, you may get some progress on the trade front, but on the more important issues of the Korean Peninsula and North Korea and the Japan-South Korea relationship, I don't expect much progress on those fronts.
But do you think they'll be able to resume talks between North Korea and the U.S., though?
I have my doubts about that, or at least in any substantive way. Keep in mind that Washington has tried for the last 2 years to take some pretty revolutionary steps toward North Korea, really to support South Korean President Moon's unrequited sort of love offensive towards North Korea. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of support, let's say, within the U.S. for restarting talks. Then what you have separately between South Korea and Japan and even China, those are in some ways very differing objectives in how they approach North Korea and also what they want from North Korea.
Do you think that there's a sense of urgency, perhaps? So we had heard from veiled threats, or not so veiled perhaps, from North Korea saying that they were going to be giving the U.S. a Christmas present.
Oh, it depends on one's context. If you've been following the Korean Peninsula and North Korea for 30 years, this is something we've heard before. Shrill warnings of impending disaster from Pyongyang. And so I say, if the longer you're at it, really the less worked up one gets about it. This is not to glibly dismiss it, because North Korea's missile and nuclear capabilities are better than they ever have been. They are getting better. But as I said, this is something that we have seen before. Whether the best approach is to beg North Korea to talk, that's very much in doubt. Really the solution, if you want to control North Korea's behavior, that is in Beijing. Really all Xi Jinping has to do is give Mr. Kim a call and tell him to knock it off, to put it simply. So I really don't see that there's a whole lot to be gained from begging the North for talks this time.
All right, you mentioned that it all boils down to, Mr. Xi, they are, after all, holding this talk in Chengdu. The three leaders are meeting. How much of an influence can President Xi have or hold over North Korea? And how much do you think Japan and South Korea will actually agree to China and Russia's deal of easing sanctions on North Korea? Do you think that will come into play? Or do you think that will help them in any way?
Certainly in the background. China has, or Beijing has, all the influence over North Korea that you could imagine. Cut off the oil, cut off the economic support, and keep in mind that Beijing actually helped North Korea develop its missile capabilities and by all accounts helped it develop its nuclear capabilities. So it could turn the tap off any time it wants. Nobody else has that kind of influence. In terms of the other question you mentioned, as I say, there are different approaches in Seoul and Tokyo. Seoul is willing to do quite a lot in terms of concessions to get North Korea to cooperate and just behave nicer, for want of a better word, and within the Korean administration. There's a substantial constituency which sees the Americans as the problem, and if they would go away, South and North Korea could work something out. In Japan, there's much less support for an accommodating approach to North Korea. In Japan, you do have a sizable constituency in the political world and in the business world, which is actually pretty much in favor of accommodating China, however. So there's very different forces at play in both countries. And I don't see an agreement being reached on this. Ultimately, I think that Beijing is going to be the focal point or the fulcrum that is going to decide whether or not there's progress with North Korea or not. I don't see anything that can be done in Seoul, in Tokyo, or even in Washington, for that matter, that would really have any serious effect on North Korea's behavior.
One last quick question on the other two countries that are there as well, Japan and South Korea. Speaking about their sort of trade and security issues, how do you think that's going to impact the talks, given that they have sort of their own sort of festering concerns with each other?
No, they certainly do. And that's probably not going to be resolved in an afternoon. But I think Japan has taken some initial steps to relax the trade restraints that it put on South Korea. At the same time, South Korea backed off as well on their sort of termination of the intelligence sharing agreement. So I think both sides are trying to sort of move incrementally to step back a bit. But in terms of the fundamental problem, that would be comparable to the Irish and the British fixing things. It's going to be with us for a long time, but you can suppress the problems, and I think that's about as much as we can expect. And there may be some limited progress between those two countries, but not in solving the fundamental issues. And the idea that the Americans have been pushing for a long time of meaningful Japan, South Korea, and U.S. Defense cooperation against North Korea and in Northeast Asia, that just may remain a pipe dream for the foreseeable future. And if anything, I think these meetings actually benefit Beijing. It seen as playing a role as a mediator, seen as playing the role of the sort of the solution to North Korea going through Beijing, and appears to be the more important country in Asia, and that tends to displace the U.S.'s traditional role as let's say, the mediator, as the great power in Asia. So it's interesting to see that Beijing make some progress from a sort of political warfare, or the perspective of their political standing and how they're perceived. And I tend to look at it from that perspective. In some respects, this meeting is all about Chinese efforts to weaken U.S. alliances. And I think they will make some progress towards their ultimate objective.
All right, well, many thanks for sharing your thoughts with us this evening. Grant Newsham, Senior Research Fellow at the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies in Tokyo.